Hello and welcome! Happy New Year and thank you for joining us. I'm Judith Rinehart of the Rinehart Gallery, and with me tonight is Kelda Martensen for her exhibition, Familiar Places to Let Go, here at the Rinehart Gallery in Seattle, Washington. We want to start off by just saying thank you so much for joining us. We feel that this is a very tumultuous time in our world, and art is one of those things that brings us together and connects us to our humanity and to our community, and we felt it was incredibly important to still put on this exhibition, have this opening, and talk about the work. So thank you again for joining us. We want to thank the Seattle Print Arts, and we want to thank the Sustainable Arts Foundation for helping make this exhibition possible. And also thank you to Kelda Martensen for coming and being here and putting together this amazing work.
Thank you, Judith.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we're just going to kick right off. We wanted to do a walkthrough of the exhibition, talk a little bit about your work, where this series came from, as this was all created in 2020. And where you're going to go from here.
Sounds good.
So, I guess my first question to you is, tell me a little bit about just where this show started and where it has been taking you and what you've been doing to create it. That was a huge question.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, first, I just want to also welcome everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this show for so long. And also just acknowledge that everyone is processing and dealing with so much right now and spending a lot of time on screens already. And so it means a lot to me that you're here and that you're watching. And I just, I'm happy to be contributing and connecting with the communities that that bring us a lot of love and that bring us a lot of joy and momentum forward in times like these. So as Judith said, we really feel like we could still have this tonight, and we're glad you're here. So yeah. Thank you. So yeah, the work, these particular pieces that we're standing next to now are, they all started with a solvent transfer of the moon, so quite large, like maybe 8 by 8 foot or something. And I was thinking about the moon is such a captivating and romantic image and mysterious image, but it's also is so familiar. And I think that these pieces for me were about when you're in this territory, like in heavily used symbols like the moon, you're in overly tread areas potentially. And so like the creation is about digging yourselves out of that overly familiar territory. And in that process of digging out, you get into some strange places, and the colors and the compositions are a way of like making it your own. So these pieces, there's a lot of like wrestling going on in them, trying to get to some place new from a place that's all so familiar to us, that all of us has seen every single day of our lives and existence, and how do you make a new spot from there? So, but at the same time, there's this hum of familiarity that remains. And these works, I also thought about them as a way of finding focus and play and momentum in this time. So in 2020,
why would you need focus?
I know. Just my brain was all over the place and just really distracted, and I could see that in my children as well, and in my family and in my friends. And so I felt like I was spending so much time grieving that loss of focus and grieving that loss of play that I was forgetting I had the opportunity to do it in my studio and make it happen on paper. And so these were sort of the result of that wrestling and that time of taking something familiar, trying to get to someplace strange, and trying to find focus and fun in that process.
I would definitely say that you've accomplished that goal. I think a lot that has been written about you and said about you as an artist. You are not one to stick to just one way of doing things. I mean, part of what I love about your work is there's so many textures, there's so many different processes of creating those textures. And then after all of that, you're doing monotypes, you're doing lithography, you're doing these solvent transfers, which are phenomenal and fascinating how that is even possible. But then you're cutting them all up and collaging them together to something absolutely new and absolutely different. So I am not surprised that you were the Larry Summers Fellow last year, or last year, 2019 now. Not surprised. You are a phenomenal printmaker, and these are amazing just works that draw you in. And I wanted to kind of talk about this piece because you had mentioned that this is done on Mylar. Can you tell me about how you do that?
Yeah, well, the Mylar print is only in parts, and they're from photographs, some old. This was the top left is a photograph of my mother's, and is pilings, and so it's very much, it's called Familiar Tides, and the name of the show is Familiar Reasons to Let Go, and that is sort of about this undercurrent that continues on despite the tumultuous ups and downs of the moment and of social movements, and so the familiar reasons to let go. I mean, we had this conversation with our neighbor who just walked in, right? It was like everyone I talk to just says, I just had to let go. I had to let it go. Like, I was concerned about this, trying to hold on and control this time or this, feeling in 2020, and I had to let it go. And I just kept thinking about that too, and like, well, what are the familiar reasons we do let it go? It's like, well, the tide is still moving out, the moon is still rising, right? And so just realizing that we are small. And so this, to go back to the Mylar, is about sort of pulling from different times in history. Time that I spent in Alaska, it has a very much a Northwest sort of feel to it. The going to the water is healing for me and for many. So the printing on Mylar is a digital process, and then we also have wood grain in there, and monotype and wood block. And then also a little three-dimensionality, which hopefully everyone will be able to see the show, or hopefully some will be able to see the show and see the three-dimensionality.
The gallery is open Wednesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. You are welcome to come in and see this work in person. I would highly recommend it.
Please do.
Yeah, it's so hard to capture on film or in photographs, just the dimension that's there. I mean, we've talked before about how your work is, you're using also bookbinding techniques within your work. So there's this dimension that's super fascinating. Definitely come and see it in person. Also to mention, tomorrow, January 9th, Saturday, Kelda will be in the gallery from 2 to 4. Come by, say hello. There's also 2 other opportunities to come by and meet Kelda, say hello, on January 23rd. On Saturday, January 23rd from 2 to 4, and then again on February 6th from 2 to 4. And the show is up till February 13th, so there's plenty of opportunity. So I did want to talk a little bit about the solvent transfer of the moon. We had touched on it a little bit, but I want to go and look at this piece called Moonbow and have a bit of a conversation about that process. So this was, I think, one of the first images you shared with me from this exhibition, and this piece is called Moonbow. It has these hot pinks in it, this really like sunsetty color, and then this big image of the moon. So, and you talked a little bit about solvent transfers. Can you tell me about that process a little bit, and then also why?
Well, the process is just based on the release of toner. So you would, use a toner-based printing process, just with any digital. Oh, whoops! Technical difficulties. Not good with these. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't be good without it.
I run it through the press with a toner-based print that's pretty freshly off the press from like a printer.
Oh, okay.
Like an Epson digital printer. Toner-based, and then run it through with solvents. And so under the pressure, the solvents release all of that toner onto the printmaking paper. And so you can see there's seams in it, and those are not actually three-dimensional. They're flush with the paper, but they're sort of meant to. So I have a lot of fun trying to tease the viewer and tease myself as I'm making it into what's actually a third dimension collage and what's an edge that's only an illusion of an edge. So like this overlap here is actually flush and isn't collage.
Oh wow, I would have not thought that.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's a little scavenger hunt to see what's a raised edge and what's flush. But and yeah, I was just captivated, and I feel like I needed something bigger, something upward, something celestial, something sort of out of this world to focus on.
Something literally you cannot control.
Right. And so it seemed like a good starting place, and though I kept trying to work with it as a whole image, as I was mentioning, it just felt sort of like territory that had been tread before, that I couldn't quite make my own. And so the composition became about that tension of trying to make it strange and new. And there's like pages, if this, this actually does operate as a book page. And I also found in this way of trying to create focus and play and invent new spaces, I tried to sort of pull and push us out of the composition. So making like kind of openings in a two-dimensional plane is what I'm always after in my work, trying to get it to feel deep in there.
Well, I love what you were saying about play, because when you look at these pieces, especially this series, like it is something you want to play in. You dive in, you're visually just taken in and out and through, and it
I love that.
feels very playful, which is great.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think in and out and through is sort of what I'm thinking about with these works, for sure.
So this is something that just came to me. You have the piece that's about the tides, you have the piece that's about the moon. Was that a conscious decision to think about these things you can't control that kind of control each other?
Yeah, I think that is how they're connected, for sure.
That's so fascinating. I'm sure I had another question, but I think we had touched on it a little bit about you're making works that are based in bookmaking in a lot of ways, and you actually have made fine art books, and we have one as part of the show. So we're gonna pop over and take a look at the fine art book.
Great. Yeah, let's do it.
I'm probably moving too fast, I'm sorry.
We can slow it down.
That's me.
I'll slow it down now. So this is an artist book. It's one of a kind, and it lives within this case. And so the connection here, I feel like this piece connects the other sort of series in the show, which we can talk about. But this also is found photographs from my father-in-law's book, which I'll talk about later in the other series. And in it lives this artist book, which also uses a lot of the same, I don't know, I'm sure the photos aren't online, but I encourage folks to come in and take a look. But you'll see the similar wood grain as you'll see in this piece. Bits from all of them. And it relates in terms of texture and also series, and tries to get at the same sort of more land-based and ecological forms while still referencing the galaxy and the stars. So again, just trying to connect to something quite larger than ourselves.
I love that. So talk to me a little bit about art books as opposed to, you know, a coffee table book, or how is this, I mean, it is a one-of-a-kind object, but what makes it special as a book?
That's like the big question.
Right?
Yeah. And I think book artists, and I admire this woman, Sandra Krupa, so much, who is the rare and artist books collection specialist at University of Washington, who always says, like, there's really no answer to that question. Like, you can call most things a book if you want them to be. For me, the artist book is a way of taking the print into an intimate space, and it's a way of lending narrative and sequence to my work, which I feel that it has. It references literature, it references storytelling, it references history just by the mere form that it takes. And I appreciate the three-dimensionality of it. And so there are fine art book printers and book binders, and I like to play more within the realm of where it overlaps with printmaking. So I'm very comfortable in that overlap, and so a lot of my prints also sort of are actually books that are framed and sort of frozen in one spread, which I also find sort of good territory for me, because it hints at that there's this story there's this sequence, you could sit down with it, but you're only ever seeing one moment in the story at a time. And I, you know, right now don't have access to a letterpress, but I do also really like to use text and incorporate text in this particular work. It's only comes through in my titles. I am always sort of trying to play with poetry a little bit.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah. I feel like there's something wonderful about you talking about these intimate moments within this book, because this could sit on somebody's shelf, but when they open it, it opens up this whole new world. And I think there is this thread throughout your work, as I was kind of putting together the show and hanging everything, that the work, every little piece is a gem that speaks for itself, but then it informs the one next to it. So I could see this book being this precious moment of release in some way, of there's something deeper, there's something under the current, there's more than meets the eye in some way, which I think describes you very well as an artist.
Thank you.
Tell me about other art books you've made.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't edition them often. Sometimes I do, but they're always very small runs, and part of that is just the result of the type of facilities I have access to in the studio. But I oftentimes work very reactively, and artist books take a lot of planning if you're going to edition them all. So that's also a sort of point of tension that I like to play around and try to subvert. I'm a big fan of ephemera, like very casual, just like zines and sort of postcards or broadsides or things that are meant to be disseminated and to get out information quickly and casually, even though the topic may be not casual at all, but very important. And so I play a lot with, even though I've worked in many different types of bookbinding, I always return to like the humble accordion book or a standard form, because I just feel like there's something very classic in the valleys and mountains of the book. I love all the metaphors of the book. I mean, they talk about valleys and mountains and spine and the body, and so the books that I make are, yeah, I would say they live a little closer to printmaking, just because they're heavily inked, they're heavily worked. I really try to push the paper pretty far, not too precious with it, and try to also just have really surprising moments and moments that feel like, you know, that are just one or two actions, you know, sort of what happens. And that's how I think about collage too, is like two forms coming together, two textures coming together, two moments coming together, and like what's happening on that edge. And the book is nice because it lets you sort of sit with that moment and move on, but you're always still holding it. Whereas in the gallery setting, you see a print, you sit with that moment, and then you move on, and you're no longer with that earlier moment. But the book, like, you're sort of staying with it. So what you were talking about earlier, where they're informing the other pieces, and there's sort of that momentum and that building upon, that the energy of it is still kind of with you tactily and like physically there. You're still holding the weight of that story in that moment. So,
yeah, this book in particular, I think when you were first telling me, oh, I'm going to do this artist book, I'm like, okay. Whatever that means. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot with artist books before, but like seeing it and then looking at it and handling it and going through the pages and figuring out the best way to really just display it so I can have all those moments was fun. Which, if you do come to the show, I will happily go through the book with you. But it is a really fantastic piece.
Thank you.
And you mentioned not having access to a letterpress, and I'm assuming that's because of the world. How has your studio practice changed, and how, like, all of this work was created last year? This is a huge body of work for 1 year. How did that come about in your studio?
Well, I have to thank my family for giving me some time to get it done. You know, it happened in very compressed moments, so the material itself sort of happened over longer. Like I can make a woodblock sheet or a flat monotype or you know, whether it's a pronto plate lithography or things that take a lot of hours, but I can't necessarily. Those are sort of always being made because it's more rote, it's not as, I don't have to do as much like wrestling conceptually with it just to create the texture. And then in the composing of the work, putting the work together, it just was so concentrated. So how has my studio practice changed? I have a studio in the home, which I'm very lucky to have, so I was able to still have access to my printing press and all of my materials, my etching press, but I just didn't have the time because I'm now teaching remotely and the kids are home more, and my you know, our whole family dynamic is different, how like many of ours are. So with everyone in the house, I can't really focus at all. So they left. I worked hard for hours at a time, and then, you know, then it just took a pause while I did my job and everything else, and then they would leave again. I would do everything.
So like the waves of the tides of the moon was coming in and out of your life as you created this work and made it.
So it feels, it feels hard fought. It feels like there was a lot of, you know, I was thinking about the work all the time. It wasn't running through my head, but the actual time I had to interface with it was short and condensed and a bit manic, right?
Yeah.
Like just, it had to happen. And if it didn't happen, it wasn't going to happen, right? Like they're driven by deadlines.
Well, I feel like there's this push, there's this moment where with a lot of art happens in chaos. I think in the essay, we have a great exhibition catalog that is available online right now, that Lauren Gallo wrote this amazing essay where she talks about this moment of art being made when things are frenetic, art being made quickly and roughly, and when things are going crazy around you, you're able to focus, like you had to force the focus, but focus and make something. And that almost becomes more true to who you are, to what your values are, what your needs are, to getting it out there and getting it done. So I really appreciate that insight. And I really love that. Thank you to your family. Like, this really would not have happened had I not given you give you a moment.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing with this show and with the you said in your artist statement you have two kind of points of contact where you started this exhibition. One was kind of the moon and the tides and these celestial moments that you have no control over, and the second was finding this this ream of paper from the 1960s at your father-in-law's house. And you created these amazing pieces, and there's a piece of that paper in the book.
Yep.
And I loved this newsprint. I love the coloring of it. I love it. It's just this found paper. So I'd like to get a little more background on these pieces while we take a closer look at them.
Yeah.
So this part of the exhibition are these small gems that I definitely have my favorites.
Nice.
And you talked a little bit about this paper, where it came from. Tell me about the imagery. What kind of pushed you to create these pieces?
So I too was really taken and enamored with the paper itself, and printmakers and artists often we're warned, or we warn others, don't, newsprint will turn brittle and fade, or it feels like it's this ticking, it's got a clock behind it for how long it will last. But here's this paper, 60 years later. And this, I call it the fawn sort of color of the paper itself, just is deepening and becoming more rich. It's still very much intact and lovely, and now protected with UV glass. And then these cyan, beautiful lines that you can sort of see by the original printing. Some of them just bleed ever so slightly. So I just fell in love with the paper itself, and I feel like that color is something I'm often trying to replicate when I'm mixing ink. And so this, for me, I said, I'm gonna pretend it's like note-taking, sometimes just 1-2 action collages, and leave it. And sometimes that's enough. I think a lot about, I've talked about this in other artist talks, but this Borges quote where he's just thinking about compressing the meaning of the universe into one little short story. And sometimes the idea doesn't need more time and space than it needs, then you have to give it. So I'm thinking about that a lot with my new relationship with time in the studio since becoming a mother, is maybe this idea doesn't need more space. Maybe this idea can be said in this one action, in this moment, in this one edge, because the material itself, though the newsprint is found, the materials on top of it are the result of a highly laborious process, a lithograph or a woodcut or an etching or a collagraph. So there's a lot of the story is sort of in the paper scraps, and in that I'm sort of culling back in my own personal history to earlier times, to times that I've been in the studio. So for me, they're very rich with memory, and they're also about what do we want to remember just by nature, by the virtue of them being on notebook paper. It's what is this paper for? It's for jotting down something you want to remember. And so for me, they're about that, about sort of note taking, okay, here is this year of 2020, and though I have no distance from it and I don't have much perspective on it at all, I can take notes while I'm in it.
Right.
And this is sort of my way of note taking, of trying to just remember this moment. And though it oftentimes these types of collages in my studio exist as a temporary collage, where I'll just sort of hover to textures together and document it just through the camera and call it done. But in the case of this series, I wanted to actually commit to it. So as a way of saying, I'm going to commit.
This is the note, done.
But I think there's a lot of story in them, and they also sort of read well one after the other in a sequential format. And there's a lot of surprises. Like there's one here where it felt like a two-dimensional page. It's called Opening, and I lifted the page in the studio, and this like bright red revealed itself underneath it, and so it became like this book, and we were able to frame it in a way where it's open. So there's sort of another example of how I approach artist books. It's only one page, you can't leaf through it, but there's a lot of sort of depth to be mined there.
And that one, I feel like there's a few that kind of have those moments of, oh, the dimensions coming out, and even though it seems very simple, where it's notebook paper and this one little thing, there's so much more yet to be revealed. And there's a few of them that kind of have that push and pull, which is really wonderful.
And there's a lot of transparency, so I think that push and pull happens in the transparency too. It's like even if it's not a literal page that you can turn, you can see through to the page underneath. And so there's still a page turning of this in effect that happens just through the material.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I feel like we definitely want to turn the page of 2020.
Yes, I know.
Open
and
to
2021.
And 2021, just to get it over with. But thank you. I really appreciate you having this exhibition. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We are open to any questions. If you're on YouTube, there are you can put your questions in the chat. We're happy to answer anything you ask.
Absolutely.
And thank you again for watching. As we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'll say that once again the gallery is open Wednesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. The show is up now until February 13th, so there's plenty of time to come and see the work in person. I would highly recommend it. I feel like this is an incredibly sophisticated show, and I really appreciate you having your work here. And once again, thank you to the Seattle Print Arts and the Sustainable Arts Foundation for helping make the show happen.
All right, shall we toast while we?
Let's, yeah.
While we wait.
And cheers. To a new year.
To a better, more equitable democracy and a new year.
Yes.
Cynthia Hibbard asks, remind us when Kelda will be in the gallery.
Kelda is going to be in the gallery
tomorrow,
January 9th from 2 to 4. And then again on Saturday, January 23rd from 2 to 4. And then your final is February 6th.
Yes.
Which is also a Saturday from 2 to 4. But Cynthia, if you want to make an appointment, just give me a call.
Yeah, for you, Cynthia, I will come. Yeah, and I'm happy to arrange individually too.
Seattle Print Arts asks, beautiful show, Kelda. Can you share your favorite pieces, both of you?
Oh, you first, Judith.
Oh, this is so hard. I don't know if we can zoom. It's probably this one. And I'll say, earlier last year, time is meaningless, we did a studio visit video, and you had parts of this piece. You were working on this piece, and I just kind of loved the beginning of it. And I had seen the beginning, and then I hadn't seen anything else since, and then this showed up, and I went, oh! So yeah, I absolutely love that piece. And then this piece is called Bellegarde that I put on the cover of the catalog. There's something about that orange and these lines and this blue that's just choice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For me, I think I really, I like the book. Yeah, I think books automatically sort of make it to my top, but this one feels, it feels like it worked for me, and yeah, I'm really happy with it. I'm happy you were willing to show it. You know, I know book arts is something that it sometimes gets categorized or compartmentalized into a different sort of setting, but I think it helps the show kind of become the more intimate space that I want it to be. Yeah, and then I got into my hot pink fluorescent ink. So yeah, I'm kind of into this red and pink one in the corner too.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's called Maps.
Map, yeah.
Oh, it's so good. No, it's hard to pick favorites.
Yeah. I don't know. What's yours, Seattle Print Arts? I can turn it back on Claire. That's Claire.
I think no other questions.
Okay.
Just a lot of applause, so cool, cheers, yay. Beautiful show.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you all so much for joining us. I'm speechless. This is amazing. This was what a weird time to have an exhibition, but I'm so glad we did.
But it's such a good time to have sort of expectations put on you that remind you of like what you love, and you know, something that you like. For me, I should just speak in the first person, but like to have someone still expecting me to be fully in my artist self, right? Like for you as a gallerist to just be like, you're having this show and we're having it, and I'm moving forward as a gallerist throughout this time, and you're moving forward as an artist. And it's just good that we sort of remind ourselves of these roles that we play in the communities we've chosen to be a part of, and to have that expectation. So I've really, really appreciated it. Yeah. I mean, I won't say it, there's been some stress moments, but it's meant a lot to me to have this sort of as also what will happen this year is a show.
Yeah.
I don't know how it will happen, but it will happen.
And it's happened.
And it's happened, so I'm really thrilled to share it with everyone, and I hope you can come see it. There is a lot of texture that doesn't come through in the video or the photos, so yeah, I'd be thrilled if people saw it too.
We have more questions.
I talked too long.
Seattle Print Art says, thank you, yes, love bright pink. Were there new ways of printmaking that you incorporated into these pieces?
Oh. That's a good question. I don't know about new I don't think so, not for me. But I hadn't done so much of the like collaging and then solvent transferring the collage. So what I was talking about earlier with the moon piece, where there's layers and seams and overlaps, but those are all part of the transfer, and so you're not, they're flush with the page. And another thing I did is I had a whole print and a collage done, and I didn't think it worked, and so I printed over that, and I used that as my monotype surface. So I used the print itself as a collage, which now we're getting into the weeds. I'm sorry. Printmakers are like, printmakers. Okay, can we talk about process now? But I used the paper itself as a collage versus the plate. And you'll know what I mean. But that was new, and that was born out of like a failure, right? Which is something trying to always talk to students about. Like the print failed, so now the print is serving as the plate, and now like something else can be born from that.
Jane Hardy asks, how many years of work do we see in these layers upon layers?
Good question, Jane. I would say the earliest, we have paper from the 1960s, but I think from prints myself, probably the earliest, there's a lot that's in the last year or two, but I think I have 2007 in here somewhere.
Wow.
Wow. And the Bellegarde postcard, which is the only other found object in the show, is from a flea market in 2011.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So.
Mira Vital asks, Fantastic show, Kelda.
Hi,
Talk
Mira.
about digging yourself out of familiar territories you made work about the moon. What was new or surprising for you during that excavation?
Yeah, I love the word excavation. It's totally how it feels. I think there was a lot of new turns and moments for me. One was this moment where the collage itself turned into the collograph, so that was sort of born out of it not working. One was this letting go of the moon itself as a whole, which I was so attached to. It's such as, you know, this image that's sort of like perfect, but you can't use perfect images in work because that's not interesting. And so trying to just tear it apart and rescue the work and excavate it, as you say, and build from it. I guess the pleasant surprise was in how the compositions were able to sort of resurrect and like get into a place where I was happy with them in such a condensed period of time. I've got to kind of reference them here a little bit. And then another thing I just really loved was spending so much time looking at certain craters of the moon and like judging like specific areas of the moon on its aesthetic value, which I had never done before. I was like, no, that's too bright, it's too cratery. You know, we gotta move over here to the shadow. So that was kind of fun, like feeling like you were actually traversing this surface. And in that way, it was sort of a nice escapism as well.
Cynthia Hibbert asks, which solvents do you use these days?
Oh, Cynthia, I can't say on camera. It's so bad. You know I use the terrible stuff.
Rachel Preston asks,
oh, hi
can you
Rachel.
explain the piece behind Kelda? It looks like water and ice. Fabulous, Kelda. I love being able to hear about your work. Usually at an opening, I would be just at the cheese table.
Me too, Rachel.
Oh, one day we'll have the cheese table again.
Water and ice, yeah, I like that thought a lot. This one is called Cloud Path, and so I was thinking a bit more up in the air, but it does sort of serve as both sky and iceberg or crater. This one was one of the ones I felt was maybe the most strange in terms of the composition that happened and potentially bold. And this is one of the only moments that I went for a true flat monotype with hardly any texture and just tried to let that color sing. And then
it's such a rich,
yeah, it's rich and
blue.
And I thought maybe it just needed to be on its own. But then of course I scrambled to texture it up in other ways. Yep. Thank you. All right.
Well, thank you all again. Check out the exhibition online at jrinehartgallery.com and give me a call, shoot me an email, and come visit. We'll be here.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you.
Stay safe.